Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Easy 11 Plus live lesson. As you might be able to hear, I'm a little bit ill, so I'm not going to keep this going too long, but I'm going to take the time to answer a few of your questions because I'm sure you've got lots, and if you don't have any, I've got some questions, some common questions lined up that I can have a go at answering. I don't see any questions at all in the comments. Someone's written, "Hi Robert," that sounds like they might be about to ask a question. That's Glasses Girl. In the meantime, don't forget that you can visit the RSL Educational website for almost everything that you need to prepare for the 11 Plus exam. Aha, fantastic, got some questions coming in. I'd be really grateful if people not asking questions could stay out of the comments as far as possible so that the comments don't disappear too quickly. And anyone who wants to ask a question and doesn't know how, you just need to join under the video. Subscribe to the channel, it's completely free, and that means you can join the live chat and ask questions. Okay, great. Geeta G, with the first question this evening, asked, what is one thing you must not forget for the 11 Plus? There are so many things that I could say here. I think the most important thing is to keep a bit of perspective. If you go into the exam thinking that your whole future life is... Oh, I should turn off the music. If you go into the exam thinking that your whole future life is riding on your success in this exam, you probably aren't going to do as well as you could, for one thing. You need to remember that having done all this preparation, being the kind of person who's got so well prepared for their exam, that you're going to do well whatever happens, even if you go to the local comprehensive school that you're doing everything possible to avoid, you'll still be a success because you're that kind of person. And I think that's a really, really important thing to bear in mind. And if there's one thing not to forget, I think it's that. With that mindset, you'll be relaxed, you'll be in the best position to show off what you can do and to succeed. But to be honest, if it doesn't work out, you'll be in a good mindset to go forward positively and make the most of secondary school wherever you end up, which is actually the most important thing. I suspect that isn't what you meant when you asked the question, though. Things you really mustn't forget to succeed in the 11 Plus exam. It's going to be a different list for each person. One of the really, really important things that I advise people to do during their exam preparation is to keep a written record of their common mistakes. So that you know to avoid them. Because the last thing you want to do is go into the exam and make the same mistakes that you made 2 weeks ago, that you made 2 months ago, that you made 2 years ago. Know what those mistakes are so that you know to look out for them and you know not to repeat them. For example, you might be somebody who, when asked to reverse a 20% increase, instinctively tries to find 80% of the number. You need to remember that that isn't the way to do it. You need to have a note that, hang on, when you're reversing a percentage change, you need to work it a little bit differently. I'm not going to explain why and not explain how, because that isn't what this lesson is about. This is a general Q&A. You might be somebody who keeps forgetting to put apostrophes for possession. So, for example, Robert's live lesson needs an apostrophe. It's the live lesson of Robert. So your list might contain possessive apostrophes. Obviously, you can't carry that list into the exam on paper, but you should have worked with it enough that it's in your head so that you know your common mistakes to look out for. If you don't have such a list yet, start making it, start working with it, start remembering it. Sorry, that's the cold. And so it isn't about what one thing mustn't you forget. It's about knowing what the things are that you commonly forget and being prepared to deal with them. There isn't a one-size-fits-all answer to this question. A fantastic question to begin with. Izzy08 Gamer, I think I know what your hobby is, asks, is the 11 Plus hard? I could give a really platitudinous answer about how, it won't be hard when you're prepared for it and so on. That isn't what you're asking. The level of difficulty really varies depending on which exam you're doing, which school you're applying for, and different people find different things difficult. If you go into the exam and it's hard, remember that in that case, everybody else there is probably finding it hard as well. So even getting a reasonable mark in a very hard exam is still likely to put you in the top few candidates and might well be enough to get you into the school. So in some ways, the harder the exam feels, the more encouraging that should be. If you're a well-prepared candidate and you go into the exam and it's really easy, then it could be that loads of people will be getting high marks and you won't get the chance to show off the skills that you've been practicing as you might have liked to. So don't be scared of difficulty. Another very good question. Tess asks, how old are you? The last time I answered this, I was 84. I'm 85 years old. How do you answer quotation explanation questions? I don't want to go too much into this because I talk about this a lot in my written comprehension videos, and I want to keep this a little bit more general. But to give a brief answer to this question, the most important starting points for this, I'll say a couple of things. Number one, make sure that after studying the question thoroughly and thinking about what it's after, that you then go into the text and find the relevant evidence and underline the key quotations that you want to use before you start writing your answer to the question. That's really important. And that's going to be the main stage in your planning, apart from analysing the question. And that will mean that you don't have to dig around for quotations while you're writing. It'll mean your answers are much better. Second thing I wanted to say is that possibly the most important thing about quotations in comprehension exams is that they should be as short as possible. The very best quotations are 1 or 2 words. The absolute longest that a quotation should ever be is 5 words. Why? There are lots of reasons for this. It's partly about efficiency and time management, but actually the most important reason is that you want to show the examiner that you can find the exact evidence to prove your point. If you can find the exact word that supports your point, then you've shown that skill. If you end up copying out 2 lines of the passage, then what you've shown is that you know the answer somewhere in there, but you're not quite sure where. And that's much less impressive. So keep your quotations as short as possible. And 1-word quotations are the best kind of quotation. I hope that's helpful. Can you please do a video on Henrietta Barnett? I have a difficulty making videos for specific schools which don't share past papers or practice papers. And that's an obstacle for some schools. And that's the main reason why I don't have school-specific videos for certain schools on this channel. Tracy Zhao says, long time no see. Long time no see. Wonderful to have you here again. How do you improve English and creative writing? Obviously, you go to the RSL Educational website and find the resources for English and creative writing. What better support could there possibly be? It's the RSL Educational with almost everything you need for the 11+. I'm not very good at this advertising thing. Maybe I'll get better with practice, but I'm practicing for many years and I'm still rubbish at it. The quick answer is practice, but that's actually a misleading answer because if I say practice, most people interpret that to mean they should do as much practice as possible. And actually doing lots of practice is usually quite a bad way of improving skills in these areas. What you need to do is a moderate amount of practice very, very well. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you compare one person who writes 3 practice essays or practice stories in a week and another person who writes 1 practice story in a week, quite often you'll find that the person who writes 1 actually learns faster. Why? Because the person who writes 1 also has time to plan the work really carefully, think about exactly what they're going to write and work slowly and carefully and make it as good as possible. Then they have time to go through and edit it and make it even better, reading it aloud to themselves, which, by the way, is one of my main bits of advice, and it's not just a suggestion. It makes the difference between the people who pass and the people who fail. Read it aloud to themselves and hear where it works and where it doesn't. Then, having made their edits, they've got time, because they're only writing 1 thing a week, to actually go and write a new version, a cleaner version, and then edit it again. And they have time to do this iterative process, to use a big word, which makes their work as good as it can possibly be. And by the end of that, they've learnt a huge amount. Whereas the person who writes 3 pieces in a week is probably making the same mistakes again and again and again, and not really learning much. So how do you improve English and creative writing? There are many, many answers to this, but one of the main things I'd point you towards is to absolutely prioritize the quality of your practice over the quantity. And working really carefully at length and repeatedly on the same piece is going to teach you a lot more than doing lots and lots and lots of practice. How many questions are there in total? It completely depends on the exam. Do you have to simplify your answers? This is for maths, unless there's an indication not to. If you've got a fraction, for example, yes, you should simplify it. If you're talking about English, yes, you should communicate in the simplest and clearest way possible. What are you doing for live 146? What's this? Is this 145? I haven't got it in front of me. It's live something. If you mean what's for the next lesson, who knows? I was away this weekend and now I'm a bit under the weather, so I hadn't planned anything especially for today, and I certainly haven't planned anything for next week. There'll be something. Who knows? It'll be exciting. Which is harder, GL or CEM? It depends on the exam, but the reality is that you're much more likely to do a GL exam these days. They're kind of taken over the written exam paper market. You're more likely to pass CEM if you're doing certain online exams, which is an area that they're focusing on a little bit more. Apologies to anyone from the CEM exam board, whose work I have grossly misrepresented. Will set results come today? I don't have the foggiest idea. I don't know very much about sets. How has the City of London boys paper? It depends. They've been changing their exam up as well. I'll report back on that. Can you create a channel where you teach SATs? I think I've got enough on my plate. How to answer how questions? It's a great question, but it's very specific. There are lots of questions about specific schools. I'm generally going to try and steer away from those because I want this to be useful for everybody. Lots of questions asking what's harder. It depends on you, and it depends what you find easier and what you find harder. I'm going to steer away from those. Someone asked if the stream ended. No, not as far as I know. Vavana Ra, how do I get in the website? The website's linked in the video description. It's rslEducational.co.uk. Loads of school-specific questions that I'm avoiding. How do you improve English comprehension and creative skills? I've answered that already. It'd be really great if you could avoid asking the same questions again and again, because it means I don't see the new questions. I am scrolling through all the questions, so I will see what you've written. Lots of what's harder questions. Lots of school-specific questions. Goodness me, people. Jason Breyer, a nice general question. What revision techniques do you recommend? You might be able to guess what I'm going to say next because it's quite similar to various other things that I've said. The most important thing with revision is not to do the same thing that your friend does or that I say to do or whatever it might be just because that's something you've heard. You can start from those points, but the main thing in revision is to try out different approaches and see what works for you and adapt those approaches. Revision is about you and your brain, and everyone's brain works a little bit differently. So you need to find the things that actually work for you. What does working mean? It means that when you learn a new skill, you remember it at least substantially the next time you come to it, and then after you've practiced it a couple of times, it's really well embedded. If you've got a revision technique that works for you, then that process will keep ticking along. You'll keep building your skills and your knowledge. If you've got a revision technique that isn't working, then you'll be getting the same things wrong again and again. And that's really the measure of it. And you need to play with different things that work. Just for example, some people find rote learning with flashcards, for example, very useful. Some people find it completely useless and utterly off-putting. That's something that varies enormously depending on who you are. Some people find that working through lots of exam papers and pulling out their mistakes and working on those is a useful way to work. I think that is a good approach for a lot of people, but some people do find it more effective to spend a lot of time working on, working with chapters on particular skills in workbooks, and they don't spend so much time with exam papers. I'm a little bit cautious of that approach, especially in the last year or so before the exam, because I think what tends to happen if you work topic by topic, you get to the 10th topic and you've forgotten the first one and you just go around in circles. I think the advantage of working with exam papers is that it mixes things together and keeps everything fresh. But that isn't true for everybody. So be flexible in the way that you revise and try different things. Master Riddle, what do the numbers 11, 69 and 88 all have in common? Please answer, sir. Well, you call me sir, so I've got to answer. I think it's that they all look the same if you flip them upside, if you rotate them through 180 degrees. That looks like a possible answer. Can you make a video for older children? I mean, older children are welcome to watch my videos. I would say that some of the videos on my channel are more suitable for all ages and some less. For example, my creative writing videos should be relevant to children of pretty much any age. Other things are more 11 plus specific. But I focus mainly on the 11 plus because that's where I've done a lot of my work. It's where a lot of the stuff on the RSL Educational website is focused. And yeah, it means that people know to come to me for 11 plus and they go to somebody else or something else. Goodness me, so many repeated questions. Are there any websites you recommend for revision? Obviously, the RSL Educational website. Can flashcards help you a lot? Yeah, if you're using them to learn specific knowledge, they can be very useful for spellings, but you need to use them well. I'll talk a little bit about flashcards. I use flashcards a lot. I use them daily for language learning, foreign language learning. So I'm a big fan of flashcards, but they don't work by themselves. You have to practice the knowledge also daily, really, in context to actually do anything useful with it. The point of flashcards is that they work well with an approach that's known as spaced repetition. So I'm just going to very briefly explain how spaced repetition works. There are some really good apps. The most notable one is called Anki, A-N-K-I, which is free actually, unless you're on iPhone, in which case it costs a little bit. I think it costs a little bit on iPhone, I might be wrong. But anyway, it's free on most devices. Anki, which is a good flashcards app, which does this for you. But let's imagine that you're working with paper flashcards. So if you don't know what a flashcard is, it's going to be a little bit of paper. Let's imagine this Strepsils packet, because I'm a bit ill. So on one side of the bit of paper, you write the question. So if it's a spelling, then, for example, you might, what's a spelling that a lot of people get wrong? Maybe beautiful. So maybe you write, Robert was looking beautiful today, but beautiful is horribly misspelt. And it's written in capital letters and everything else in lowercase. So you know that beautiful is the word that you need to spell correctly. And then on just a bit of scrap paper, you write down what you think is the correct spelling of the word beautiful. And then you turn over your flashcard to see the answer. And the answer is that it's spelled Strepsils. No, it's, I don't have any promotional deal with Strepsils. And on the back is the correct spelling of the word beautiful. And then you look at what you wrote in your bit of paper. And writing, by the way, is much more useful than just saying it to yourself. Really, you should do both. You should write it and say it to yourself. You look at what you wrote there, you compare it to the flashcard. And if it's right, and then there's a question, what happens if it's right and what happens if it's wrong? So you have your flashcards sorted into different little holders. So let's say this is a new flashcard. If you got it right, then you take the flashcard and you put it into the next holder along in your row. And that's the holder for cards that you look at in 3 days' time. So now you won't see this card again for 3 days. It is a little bit simplified, but this is just a basic way of thinking about it. And you go for your flashcards, and you come to the flashcards, all the flashcards that are due today, the ones that 3 days ago you said were for 3 days, the ones that a week ago you said were for a week's time, and so on. And as you go for your flashcards, you're moving them up and down the row. So if one's in the, if it's a card you looked at 3 days ago and you get it right, then you move it to the next one, which is probably look at it in a week. If you're in the ones that you last looked at a week ago and you get it wrong, you move it back to the look at it again in 3 days pile, or even to the look at it tomorrow pile. If you get it right, you maybe move it to the look at it in a month pile, and so on. So what you're doing is each time you get something right, you make the gap until you look at it again longer and longer, one way or the other. If you get it wrong, you move it maybe back to the beginning or maybe back down one step, depending on what works better for you, so that you look at it again sooner. So basically, things you know less well, you look at more often, and things that you know well, you look at more and more rarely, until in the end you've got cards that you won't look at for 2 years, and that probably means you'll never look at them again. You know those words. And that's basically the principle with flashcards. That's how they work. I do it with an app, as I say. I use an app called Anki. It doesn't contain any flashcards. I make flashcards that go into there. And that does the spacing out thing for me. So when I get something right, it goes further away. When I get something wrong, it comes much sooner. And there are loads and loads of ways of using flashcards. That's just a kind of basic template for how they work. To repeat, flashcards are very good for facts. that you need to drill into your head. So they're very, very useful for things like spellings, as long as you mix it with writing out and saying aloud at the same time. They aren't useful for things like comprehension skills. They aren't useful for things like maths techniques, really. I mean, some people would disagree, but for most people, they won't be useful for that. For those things, you just need to practice. But yeah, they're very useful for that sort of thing. Right, enough on flashcards. How are we doing for time? Yeah, I'm probably going to go for another 10 or 15 minutes. I'm feeling a bit under the weather. I don't want to push myself too far. Sigapi says, I've actually GTG, which I think means gotta go. Bye. Bye, although you've probably already gone because I'm a bit behind on the comments. Jason admires my work. Thank you very much, Jason. I admire yours too, whatever it might be. That's the most disingenuous comment I've made today because I have no idea what you do. Can you make more videos for advanced multiple choice comprehension reading? Because it does help me a lot. That's very politely asked. Maybe I'll do that next week. So multiple choice comprehension, not a promise, but I might do that. Lots of people asking what's hardest. Lots of repeated questions. Please don't keep writing the same questions. Anandam Party Paruban, I'm looking at you especially. You're just spamming the comments with the same question. I've already said I don't want to answer questions about specific schools, so you won't make it more likely. How much longer is the class? I just answered that one. So many people not listen to what I'm saying. I don't want to answer questions about specific schools. I don't want to say what's difficult and what's easy because it depends on the person. How do you improve in maths? That's a very general question. The same kinds of things that I've said. But what I would say with maths is that there are a lot of topics out there. So do keep working on practice papers and past papers. See the RSL Educational website. Because the danger with maths is that you work on a topic at a time and a couple of things happen. First of all, you aren't practicing questions that mix up topics, which many exam questions do. But also, more importantly, by the time, as I said earlier, by the time you get to the 10th topic you study, you've forgotten the second or third topic that you study. And you just keep going around in circles like that, forgetting. And when the exam comes, you're not really well prepared. So it certainly in the last year, the last 12 months or so before your exam, you should mainly be working with practice papers. What should you be doing with them? You need to identify your weaknesses, essentially. That might be topics, it might be kinds of questions, it might be forms of wording, it might be certain question structures. Identify your weaknesses. When you find a weakness, in other words, when you find something that you struggle with, something that you get wrong, a kind of question on which you keep losing marks, step back from the practice papers and then go into your topic-based practice book or go to the relevant Easy 11 Plus video or whatever it might be. Practice that topic until you feel more comfortable with it. Then go back to the question that you got wrong or the questions that you got wrong on that topic and work through them again and see whether you understand them better. And then when you feel confident with that, then you're ready to carry on with the practice paperwork until you identify your next weak point. And you might find yourself re-identifying the same weak point again with a different question. And that's fine. Go through the process again. But be really systematic like that. What you really mustn't do with maths practice, I mean, this applies to all subjects, but it's possibly especially true for maths, is just blaze through trying to get the most marks you can in the paper going, ooh, I got 80%, need to improve. Then you do another paper, ooh, 82%, great. And then you do another paper and you get 70% and you wonder why. Don't do it like that. Work carefully and always think about where your weaknesses are, where you're losing marks, and what you can do about it. Use them carefully, systematically, and slowly, like that. It's what I said before about comprehension papers. The person who works on one paper, I said about bits of writing, didn't I? The person who works on one bit of writing really carefully in a week is likely to improve faster than the person who writes 3 things. Same applies to maths papers. If you take as much time as you need to really understand one paper, you're probably going to end up better prepared than if you run from paper to paper. Really don't worry about your overall marks. That, you can't really do much about those. What you can do something about is how you do on each individual thing, each individual question type, each individual skill. That's where you have the power to improve. The overall marks will just follow that. You can't actually do a great deal about those. You can't make your mark go from 60% to 80% just by really wanting it to. You have to focus on those details. I hope that's useful. How to do bus stop method, sorry, far too specific. That'll come up in another lesson. Can I be told a brilliant method to study? there are so many things that I could say. Let's just focus on where we are now. If you're using my Easy 11 Plus videos, one of the most useful things that you could do is to do the worksheet before the lesson. I don't mean dash through it in 20 minutes before the lesson. I mean, when I send it out, usually on Saturday morning, take the time to do it really carefully and produce the best work that you can. So that then when you come to watch the lesson on a Tuesday evening, you're hearing what I say and looking at what I do and thinking, how does that compare to what I did? Is what I did better? Is it less good? Where are the differences? What's going on? And that's how you'll learn. So just focusing on this method of study, watching my videos, the more time that you spend with the worksheets before watching the videos, the more that you will learn. People who get the absolute most out of them also come back to the worksheets after the lesson. I don't mean immediately afterwards, I mean a few days later. And then try again, seeing how much they can remember from my explanations. And that's how it really sinks in. You'll get a bit of a theme here. I'm a big fan of slow, careful work. You learn far more from that than from rushing through. Even if you do a time paper for time practice, then once you've done it, take the time to then separately edit the work, improve the work, learn from it, make it as good as you can without any time constraints, even if you started off by doing that timed practice. Jasmine Farouk says, Robert, I did the 11 plus. If I pass, I will still watch you. Thank you for helping me on this path. Thank you so much. That's absolutely wonderful to hear. I'm absolutely certain that the time will come when you think, why am I still watching these? What's going on? And then you close your laptop lid and never come back here again. And that's right and proper, because everybody has to move on and move on to new things in their life. But for the moment, it's absolutely brilliant that you're here. How to answer PEE questions. It's quite specific. See my written comprehension videos, especially for discussion of that. One thing you may notice by its absence is that I don't actually talk much about PEE because I don't like that rigid structure. Point, evidence, explain. My point is this. Here is the evidence. Here I'm explaining it. And that works fine for some points. For some things you want to say, a slightly different structure is needed. What I encourage people to do is to think about what they want to say and how they're going to prove it to be true. And there are lots of ways that you can structure that. And I try to teach people to be a bit flexible because PEE is just a means to an end. It's a thing that's taught, hopefully, so that you can then get to that higher level of working. How to get better in punctuation. There are a couple of angles on punctuation. So there's the angle where you learn lots of rules, and there's the angle where you learn it intuitively. In other words, you just know where the punctuation comes. In my opinion, you need a bit of both. The main thing that I teach, because actually I think there are a lot of people teaching rules in school and so on, is to try and develop a bit of intuition for it. So what I really encourage, I talk about it all the time until you're all bored, is reading aloud. Because if you listen to how sentences fit together, how they're structured, where the pauses belong, you start to get a sense for where the punctuation should go. A long pause, like the one I just made, tends to be a full stop. But short pauses are often commas. A long pause, like the one I just made, tends to be a full stop. Listen to that. A long pause, like the one I just made, tends to be a full stop. Short pauses, just little lifts in the flow, not even necessarily breaths. They're commas. On the other hand, if you take a pause like the one I just took there, where you can stop, you can even, have a sip of a drink, you can take stock and start again, that's generally going to be a full stop. There are lots of other kinds of punctuation available, but the most common problems that people have with punctuation are actually just placing full stops and commas. If you can get that right, then the rest is comparatively easy. It isn't hard to know where to place a question mark. Punctuating speech correctly involves quite a few rules, but once you know them, you know them. It's getting the full stops and commas right that's the big battle. And listening to the sound of your sentences is the most important thing there. For that, you need to read aloud. There's no point reading aloud like this, just mumbling to yourself, because it won't sound realistic. You have to read aloud as though you're somebody talking to an audience. You have to read aloud a little bit like I'm talking now, as though you're actually trying to communicate. It's that communicative speech, as though you're standing on a stage, giving a talk to your school assembly, for example, which tends to convey punctuation in a believable way. It doesn't mean that all the pauses are going to match punctuation. When I speak, you can hear that I pause in some slightly odd places, but it will give you a very, very good guide. And that's the best way to go about it. Yes, there are rules that you can learn. There are things such as, one that I tell people a lot, if you've got a sentence with the word but in it, if what comes after the but could be a full sentence by itself, then you put a comma before the but, or at the end of the word before the but. So that's a rule that you can learn that tells you whether or not to put a comma before a but. So there are things like that are worth learning. But once you develop a good intuition for the sound of sentences, you're likely to get those right anyway. So, the big thing is to do lots of reading aloud. When you get into the exam hall, you can't read aloud, but you've done so much practice of it that you'll be hearing everything aloud as you write it. This is not just a tip for children. This is how you move forward with your writing in the long term. I hear my writing aloud as I write it. It's kind of the foundation of how I write, for better or for worse. Would you be able to do creative writing next week, please? This is the last time I'm asking you, sir, says Anandam. That sounds terribly threatening. We'll see. I did some creative writing quite recently. I'm slightly more drawn to the suggestion that I do some multiple choice comprehension. But we will see. The other thing slightly in my mind is some maths word questions. These are the things I'm sort of playing with. I love doing creative writing. It's probably my favourite thing to do on this channel. But I can't do it all the time. Why slow-mo? To stop people like you spamming the comments, although some people seem to be doing it anyway. Tracy Zhao, Rob, my exam is this Saturday. Panic! How to get faster in comprehension. Please answer. All right, calm down. Well, the first thing to say, honestly, and I think honesty is important, is that there's a limited amount you can do between now and Saturday. You're not going to change anything radically in this time. So relax about it. Focus on doing the things well that you're able to do well, and just go into the exam feeling positive and looking forward to showing off your skills. That's the main thing that you can do. You are in practice short of time to make radical changes. But in general, if you're concerned about your speed, then there are two main things that you need to work on. As I say, it's debatable how much you'll be able to do with these between now and Saturday. But this is my general advice for people who want to improve their exam speed over maybe a slightly longer period. The first thing to say is that you need really good systems. What people tend to do to speed up is to cut corners. Instead, you should, in a sense, the metaphor collapses here, you should be adding more corners. People who work really quickly in exams tend to be able to work in an almost robotic way, where they do this step, then 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 the answer comes out. This step, then 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 the answer comes out. Bing! It's like pressing keys on a cash register. And people who are really good at written comprehension, for example, they have that kind of system. So as soon as they see a question, they're analysing the question, they're identifying the key question words, they're finding which part of the passage it refers to, they're finding that part of the passage, they're putting a bracket around it, they're checking the question again, they're underlining the key quotations in the passage that they're going to use, they're ordering the quotations next to the text, then they're checking the number of marks, making sure that everything's aligned with that they've got enough stuff, that they've got the right structure, then they write their answer, then they check the question again to make sure they've done everything in the question, and they reread their answer as they do so, and then they're happy, and then they move on. Now that's a lot of steps, but once you're good at those steps, you can do them really, really quickly. And they mean that you're never ever just staring at the page. And if you've got a system like that really well worked out, once you're good at it, you're always going to be able to finish an exam comfortably in time. So really good systems is the key thing, but they take time to practice and develop. This is kind of the core of how I teach skills like comprehension. It's teaching people to have really clear, really repeatable systems. One example of these kinds of systems is one advantage of this kind of system is that it helps with timing. Another advantage is that if you turn up in the exam feeling like I'm feeling today, in other words, a bit groggy and ill and not really in the mood, so having really good systems means that you can do it anyway. You can kind of tap into the robot side of your being and just do the steps that you've learned, and you can be confident that decent answers will come out at the end of it, even if you're not feeling particularly inspired, particularly intelligent. So systems really, really are the key of it. The other thing that I say about timing is that timing problems are normally about specific points where you get held up. The issue isn't usually that you do everything really slowly. The issue is usually that at certain points in the exam, you get stuck. You spend far too long trying to work out how to answer a question. You spend far too long trying to find something in a text. You spend far too much time trying to work out how to begin a maths problem. As you practice, you need to identify where your sticking points are. And those are the things that you need to focus on practicing, on finding solutions to. And if you do that, you'll probably end up without any timing problems at all, because there'll be nothing slowing you down, ultimately. Hope that helps. Someone has failed lamentably to get a Gen A meme in. Sutha Piraba has written, "Skibbided toilet. Even I know that that's not what it's called. I am cooler than you. How long before my exam should I start revising? Please answer." It's a very good question. But I could throw it back at you and say, what do you mean by revision? Because revision means different things to different people. If you mean when do you start preparing for the 11 plus, the 11 plus is kind of a summary of the key skills that you've learned ever since you started learning anything. So in a sense, you're revising from the very start. There's a certain point when maybe you start thinking, I want to focus on learning certain skills a little bit more than others because they're important for the 11 plus. Maybe that happens sometime in year 4, perhaps. There's a certain point where you start actually looking at practice materials for the exam. I would say that for most people, that probably kicks in the last term of year 4 or at the beginning of year 5, generally. As long as that's not when you should start learning the topics, that's when you should start applying the topics in the context of exam preparation. You shouldn't see your first fraction at the beginning of year 5. The beginning of year 5 is where you start thinking, what does an exam question look like? How will it test me on my fractions knowledge? Where are the gaps in my fractions knowledge for these exam questions? And I would generally say last term of year 4 or the beginning of year 5 or the summer holidays in between is more or less the time when you want to start looking at actual 11 plus practice materials and thinking about what it's actually going to feel like to do exam questions. But it does depend on who you are. One thing I really don't like is people starting to do 11 plus specific practice at the beginning of year 4, even earlier. I think that's a really bad idea. What that generally leads to is burnout by the time you're getting into the last couple of terms before the exam. You're so sick of it that you lose motivation and you stop even caring, and that isn't a position you want to be in. I think there's a good up to a year, maybe 18 months possibly, of good exam practice is, of focused exam practice is a good length of time. But it does depend on the person, and, parents know their children and children know themselves and know their parents, and you and your parents can work out between you what the best preparation schedule is for you, because the things that I say are general. They're I'm talking about the average child, and the average child doesn't exist. He always does this. I don't know what I'm doing, but I always do it. Definitely. He's too annoying, my brother. He probably thinks you're annoying as well. Are there any books you recommend? Why, yes, thank you for this wonderful question. Visit the RSL Educational website with almost everything you need for the 11 plus exam, which by definition of being almost everything you need includes lots and lots of extremely useful books. What I tend to suggest to people is that they build their preparation around 11 plus Lifeline, which is the service I've got that sends out a wide range of materials, and then they go to my books for more resources in specific areas, because the material on my books is different from the material in 11 plus Lifeline. If people are specifically focused on multiple choice English schools, I also point them to my Exam Expert online courses, which are also very clearly linked on my website. I hope that's useful. There are lots of other publishers who sell 11 plus materials. I'm sure that some of them are good. Allegedly, some of them are. I have my doubts. But more seriously, I wouldn't only use resources from any one publisher, even from me. It's good to have a bit of a mix, to see things from different angles. It's the best way to develop your skills. But obviously, my stuff's the best, goes without saying. Okay, I'm seeing questions that I've seen already. I'm also feeling ill. So I'm going to knock off here. There isn't a tip of the week because this whole lesson has been tips. There isn't an any question spot because this whole lesson has been questions. So I guess there's nothing left for me to do except to say goodbye and to remind you that if you want to have a really fulfilling and successful week, there's nothing better that you could do than to visit the RSL Educational website. Google it, or rsleducational.co.uk. And I should end by saying, if you're in the middle of your exams, if you've got more exams coming up in the next week or two, the very, very best of luck. And to the rest of you, and possibly also to you, if you're absolutely crazy, I will see you next week for the next Easy 11 Plus live lesson, which will be about something.